Hi everyone, welcome to the third episode of the Cosmosis. I'm Gauri,
I'm Abhi.
and today we're going to discuss something we've been waiting to discuss since quite a few weeks.
We kind of teased it last week as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's an urban legend of sorts about Naale Ba. Abhimanyu, do you want to take the lead?
It's basically like in pop culture, people are aware of this because of this film that came out, which was quite popular. Stree.
Yes.
Which had like Rajkumar Rao and
Shraddha Kapoor. Yes.
Shraddha Kapoor in it. But I think that this lore is basically like the film is based off of that lore, and it's a popular lore in Bangalore.
It's a Kannada lore.
Yeah. So it basically it has like different versions, different local versions. The story itself. One of those is like this bride who was left at the altar, so she's kind of like looking for her fiance, and she died or something, and then she committed suicide.
Ghosts are as lonely as us.
They can relate to our like situationship struggles, but yeah, she basically kind of just looks for her husband and she haunts. So she was considered to be a witch, and then they have different versions of it in different villages and different cities, but it's basically based off of like a southern it comes from South India, the lore itself.
Yes. And I think the name or the term, sorry, not the name, Naale Ba means come
Naale Ba,
tomorrow,
yeah.
right? And I think what I know of it is that a lot of people used to write Naale Ba, which means come tomorrow, right, outside their doors or their homes, so that this apparent witch would read it and then delay her attack for the next day or next night.
That's what they did in the film too, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah. Oh, Sri Kalana, I think that's what they used to write on the walls. Yes. Which is very interesting because according to that lore, it's men who are unsafe at night because she's going to pick up men and take them away.
That's what that was one of those really interesting points which we've kind of, I feel like anyone who's seen the film also would kind of resonate with that it kind of switches one of the reasons why that film really like gained a lot of like I feel like traction amongst like the current youth or just like in feminist circles if that's right, is because of that thing that it kind of switched that dynamic which exists in real life, where you have like women are usually meant to like they kind of like made to feel unsafe at night or during odd hours, and it kind of like switches it up with this where like in this film or in this lore it's men who are made to feel like unsafe at night. I know that the film did take a lot of creative liberties to kind of get that kind of like a narrative out. They did want to like play with the feminist archetype. They kind of wanted to use those tropes, which works well. I feel like the commentary aspect of it, I'm not too sure like you would know about the lore specifically, but I feel like do you feel like the lore in itself, like does it have like any feminist connotations to it, or is it?
I feel like it's actually the opposite according to me.
Okay.
Because in my head or
I
in
haven't
India,
heard of the lore. Sorry. Yeah.
No, of course. And in India, I think a lot of demonic presence is shown as always primarily female. Right, and it's this woman again who's been left at the altar, and now she's gonna kill all men that come in her way, which is very interesting.
That's
because
so
I've
true.
never heard of something like that for men, right?
You never find that,
Yeah.
If it's a guy doing that, then he's considered to be a player, or if the blame is always put on the woman that you dodged a bullet, like in at least in that kind of like in Indian rhetoric or anywhere.
Yeah. Like I've never heard of a story where a man was betrayed and then he just
uska wo kar dete hain ki he is supposed to be
the demon. Yeah. And it's very interesting to me. So I feel like it's not very feminist. I don't know where the lore originates from. But I know that people who went through that whole phase, they actually really believed in it. And it's very interesting because it spread to a lot of parts of India. For example, I'm just reminded of this thing. I remember when I came, we were not living in India for a few years, and when we used to come back for summer break, one of my relatives, I won't say who, right, used to tell us that do not open doors at night. There's a woman who goes around and she asks for some food material or some food stuff, and you're supposed to not give it to her. This is Delhi, and you're not supposed to give it to her and just tell her
like
to.
Your place, your relative's place, or what?
Our home. So basically, we used to live in a joint family. Pehle. So gives away a lot. But so
everything but the names describes their family, everything.
सब पूछ लिया तूने. But
क्या करते हैं? बताओ.
But so they used to say that she's gonna come ask for food or something. Don't give it to her. Tell her to come tomorrow. Kind of the same concept, right? Naale Ba, which means come tomorrow.
That would freak me out, like that kind of a situation.
Yeah, I was a child.
Genuinely like blow my mind. Okay, this was this was when I thought when you were in Dubai.
Yes. We weren't in India. And that was
I thought you were talking about college and something.
No.
Okay.
Just primary school education. Yeah. So I was between the ages of 7 to 10, I think. And that's the first I heard of it. And then I grew up, I watched
that's
that movie.
That's so interesting. Like, basically, it's kind of like, you're right. It's similar to the lore, the Naale Baa role.
Yeah, lore.
Lol, you went to the film Stree, but like, the Naale Baa lore, it's kind of like another, probably like a North Indian adaptation of it, like, because it exists. They did tell you that story, so it's passed on as a story, so it kind of becomes a cultural piece.
Going back to Naale Ba, right, and the whole
which is another folklore,
yes, the whole perception and the whole image that is portrayed in media and in real life about these witches coming up to snatch up kids and to snatch up men. What do we feel about that? Because I feel like it's very prominently displayed in a lot of
100%
media.
In all kinds, like all over the world. I feel like we have that kind of dichotomy, which we did touch upon in our previous episode as well.
Just plugging it in.
Yeah, in case go check it out, guys. But like, we did kind of talk about how you have that dichotomy or that double standard that exists, where you have like the witch is considered, the chudail is considered to be like, evil and like manipulative, whereas the male counterpart, like the sorcerer or like, is kind of upheld to a pedestal, or like is just like is considered to be a guru or a baba. You don't have that same thing happening. Very rarely, if it does happen, it's very rarely that you have that same thing happening for women.
What's a like very scary male ghost or spirit presence that you
demon usually what comes to my head is like just demons
the only one I can recall is from Stranger Things.
That's
that's not Indian.
What was his name?
Vecna.
Yeah. Oh, that was done well.
That's the only one I know, but nothing from India that I
and that also kind of, they did it in such a nice way where it was like you had they kind of related it with like this science fiction
and had a whole backstory for him
instead of like a religious thing. My main point being like it's more of just like this demon due to like technology or modern science or whatever, like it's kind
absolutely.
of interesting to see that
absolutely, as opposed to the urban legend of Naale Ba, which is also based on heartbreak. Very interestingly, right? So I was kind of thinking about this whole idea of what heartbreak,
demonizing the woman during a heartbreak,
but also like what heartbreak makes people do. And at a certain point, when people discuss this witch, right, according to the legend, they kind of justify, or they kind of say that, okay, this is why she's doing it, because she's heartbroken. Right? And there's this
she's
very
crazy,
interesting...
pagal hai, and all that jazz. Whereas for men, it's usually kind of just like, oh, wow, like, oh, Romeo.
Yeah.
There's never like, oh, Juliet. Right? That's actually interesting. I just thought of that.
But
like, it's not that big.
It's very interesting Shakespearean quote, which says, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned."
Yeah. It's so sexist.
But it basically means that there is nothing more vengeful or even powerful.
That's a trope. That's literally a trope that's used after Shakespeare. It's been used in so many.
Films I mean, I kind of get that it can be sexist, but if you look at it from that lens, where you say that there's nothing more powerful than a woman who's rejected or been rejected in love. Right? I think it depends on how you're treating that trope also, in a sense. But I've never seen that being portrayed in a negative manner. They always say that a woman who's been rejected always turns into vamps in TV shows, right?
Whereas you don't really have that. That's so interesting. I'm just thinking that this quote, this kind of like when you're talking about like hell hath no fury like a woman's scorned, you don't have like another counterpart or another phrase for men in that sense. Whereas we've seen men do crazy shit for like when it comes to like, whether people have had wars and like, that over women and all of that, like, across cultures, across religions, you've had that kind of a thing. And men have done crazy shit, like from Kabir Singh to whatever.
I was just gonna say.
That's what was in my head.
That's the only recent like portrayal of a heartbroken man.
And it got so popular, right?
As far as I see it, he was...
You're so right about that. Like that's one of the most contemporary portrayals of heartbroken man and it's been lauded by society. It's done massive profits.
I don't know how. I feel like a lot of it also depends. Like, okay, I'm a firm believer that whatever the director puts out, but the kind of sensibility an audience has really affects how that film is perceived. And it's
very telling of the society and the culture of that country.
In recent media, I feel like also the audience sensibilities. I feel like if Kabir Singh was released in a different, let's say, country, the audience would have perceived it differently. I feel like in India, because there is a certain acceptability within norms for certain types of behaviors from men or like particular gender stereotypes, right?
I get what you're saying. Like you've had films in the West which have kind of explored like the male lead to be very problematic, where they might be indulging in violence.
And that's how it's taken.
A lot of like we have a lot of popular series. Like I know the argument that you're talking about. There's Game of Thrones, right? People love Game of Thrones. It's like a cult phenomenon, and most of its characters have kind of indulged. Like with Game of Thrones, most of the characters have kind of indulged in domestic violence or have been very, very problematic. Whereas in a Kabir Singh, we see that one person and everyone's just like, I get that side of the story as well. But at the same time, again, it's you're right. It's the audience's
I feel like
reaction to it that is kind of
makes it worse.
Made it worse. Whereas if it was in a different country, I feel like it could have been. It might have been just as polarizing in another country if people reacted that passionately with the lead. Like if they would have I think the difference over here is that people have like made that character to just be it's kind of this really like this alpha male character whom they resonate with and whom they kind of just like worship. It's like idol worship,
and
right?
I feel like it's
whereas I would
it's polarized either way, Abhimanyu. He's either demonized or he's taken to be ideal, right? Which is wrong. I think it's a very grey character, and it should be taken as a grey character.
I agree with you. I feel like it's for me personally. I was initially ready to see that film in this kind of a sense where I was like, okay, this isn't like this is just a morally grey character. Even though what he's doing is kind of like I wouldn't agree with that at all.
Of course not.
I get it, and maybe the director is just kind of showing that these people, because these people do exist.
And in India they do a lot of these people exist.
Domestic violence is like one of the it kind of increased during the lockdown as well. So it's and globally, so it's kind of something that's a very real problem. So I get it, like to show that character and to show it in that kind of a light could just be like a very dark take of showing that people like this exist. I feel like though it gets kind of problematic when the director himself is kind of doubling down on it, is kind of like glamorizing that character instead of understanding it, like it's a language around or the rhetoric around or what this person feels about it. I feel like if I wouldn't have seen that interview, I saw this interview of the director with I think Anupama or something of that sort, Film Companion or something of that sort. Plug, lol. Not that we are plugging Film Companion.
Not that they're going to pay heed to that either.
But maybe someday. But at the same time, that interview kind of just like
made things worse.
Made things worse for me. It kind of just like made me feel like what the red flag. Usually, I was just using that film's character as just like if I met someone and they were like, oh, I really love, like if they were just like worship. If someone would come to me and say, oh, like something of this sort where you're saying, oh, it's a complex character and it kind of shows, it's kind of like a reflection towards, like, it kind of shows us that in our society we do have people like this, and we've all met people who've had those abusive husbands, who've had those abusive partners, right? And we've kind of like, sometimes even looked the other way because we're like, it's there. Like,
and we've personally had a lot of emotionally abusive
people around us. Yeah, for sure. But you get what I'm saying. Like we are aware of these situations happening around us, and we normalize it. We kind of look the other way sometimes. Yeah. We are, so I feel like,
and I've seen this happen, Abhimanyu, in real life. Yeah. Like I've met guys who've been like that in high school.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Where they've been like, we want this ownership over our, and they kind of, like, we want this ownership over our partner.
Yeah.
And it's usually like, the men that are saying that, right? There might be different cases as well. There might be like cases where it's the opposite kind of thing is happening, and that's also equally problematic.
Of course.
That's the power dynamic. If it's whether it's like the woman, the man, in any kind of relationship, doesn't have to be like a heterosexual relationship. In any relationship, if there is that kind of a thing happening, it's kind of like wrong. Like just two partners who have that power dynamic, where one is dominant, and the other one's
aggressively
like,
dominant. Also.
Yeah. In that sense, that's kind of like not something that people want. Unless it's in someone, it's something that works for them in a different context, obviously.
Okay.
But my point being that it's I agree with that so many times it depends on the audience and the kind of people that are
the kind of sensibility they're watching the film with also. Yeah. And the reason I pick up this about heartbreak and how people view heartbroken men in media or in real life also is that like they're heartbroken, oh, iske saath bahut bura hua type of thing. In Stree, there's a very funny scene at the end, right, where he says that, how do I deal with this witch? Right, and his friend tells him, she just wants love. So just look into her eyes with love, and he's like, she's a witch. How do I look into her eyes with love?
This was hilarious. This was hilarious. I remember that scene now. Yeah.
Yes, but think about that.
They were in that cave, and they were looking at her.
And she was screaming at him, he's looking at her. Like,
that was really funny.
Yeah. And Rajkumar did such a good job
he's
with that
brilliant.
scene.
I love him.
It was so funny.
Yeah.
Like, do we think that fixing someone's broken heart will fix their attitude towards life or vengeance? Because that's the only theme that's similar in both of these movies. It's Kabir Singh and Stree.
That's interesting.
Right? Yeah. That when his heart was broken, he was just all over the place. And so was this witch. Right? And when things got better for them, or when someone showed them the
I feel like one
smallest
difference, one subtle, or maybe like a very major difference is in Stree, why this character was digested was because if that same character, instead of a ghost, if it would have been
I was
alive,
just going to say that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that the only difference is that he was seen with a lot of empathy. She was seen with a lot of fear. Right? She's actually a witch who can take you up and like...
And I feel like the only way, like adding on to that, I feel like the only way a Stree was made accessible or was kind of digestible to people was because this character, she's killing men, she's doing all of these things at night, like, making like switching the kind of
power dynamic
where you have, like, where she's making men feel unsafe at night. The only reason why that's digestible and that's okay with people is because she is, she's othered into this realm where she's a witch, she's a ghost, she's in the occult space, in the occult sphere. She's in the occult sphere, right? Space. Whereas a Kabir Singh, he's kind of just alive. He's shown to be a doctor. He's shown to be, like, he's an actual person that's living, like, amongst us, and we're just like, oh, that's fine. Whereas if it just makes me, like, think if we switched it over, if the woman was kind of like that.
Yeah. But what about other films? Do you recall any films with heartbroken women? Because I only see heartbroken men doing Channa Mereya in, like, Hindi movies.
I usually, for me personally, if I had to really talk about it, I kind of stay away from, like, the rom-com space, because it's so straight for me. It's just like so many times I don't end up relating to the characters. It's very heteronormative. That's what. It's not something that ends up, like, I'll watch it and I'll usually just be laughing.
Yeah, no, don't worry. That's with me too. I'm straight, and that's the same with me.
That's what. I'm just like, what is up with these people? So I'm like, but in terms of just like, heartbreak, I feel like, but then again, obviously those feelings in certain films are relatable to all.
Okay, like, can I ask you a quick question though? I want your perspective on this. Do you think when people are heartbroken, right, I've seen a lot of people either just go down and, not with their self-esteem, right, go down completely, self-worth goes down, and some people, they build a life that's better, or they come out with vengeance. But there's this term in psychology called sublimation, which is basically I don't know if it's a coping, I think it's a coping mechanism, where you have negative emotions, you channel them into something productive, right? For example, if I face rejection and I feel a lot of, like, anger or self-esteem issues and all of that, then I project it into building something of myself that increases my self-worth, right? Work, maybe going to, which is why a lot of people go to the gym after breakups, right? Because they're channeling that whole thing. They just don't know they're doing it.
Right?
I start podcasts after break.
No, it's lol, yeah.
Yeah, I released 3 this year. So.
We end up, even if something happens, we end up venting out in one of either our podcasts or our scripts.
Yeah, I start podcasts. I focus more attention on work if that happens.
Which makes sense. Usually you do have that kind of thing where people, whenever that realm, usually when it doesn't work, like this relationship space, usually people do end up, I feel like that's a very common thread, where people do end up, focusing on themselves,
working
their
on
ambition,
themselves,
and that's kind of, in today's day and age, like in this culture that we have, like in the current zeitgeist, I think that's a very popular thing to do. Like, it's that narrative kind of exists everywhere around us, whether it's shows, music, pop culture icons. They're all of them are kind of like, hustle. Whereas that's another conversation, whether, like, hustle culture and all of that, how that kind of, like, is that always, like, the healthiest way? Do you need to, like, while it's not bad, you need to combine it with, like, therapy or just, like, other things with with that. So it's not just
look at us
something.
giving heartbreak advice.
Yeah. We don't follow it, we just give it. But yeah, that's what they said. But coming back to Naale Baa,
Yeah.
Naale Baa, the
Yes.
lore.
Yeah, so my whole point about this was, if you hear about this witch going around because she's heartbroken and just picking up any man that she finds on the streets, do you feel any empathy towards her?
100%.
You do?
Obviously.
My first instinct would be fear.
I mean, see, I'm giving this witch this credit. I'm giving her the credit of like realizing that, dude, like, I'm not messing with your shit. I'm gay. Like, you know, I'm yeah, you go girl. Like, you know, I'm not. So I feel
So
like she should probably give me a pass. I don't know how she leans politically, but just in general, like removing that also, like, jokes apart, I feel like I do have empathy towards her, of course. Like, you know, just.
But that's after you know her story.
Even without that, okay, remove the story aspect of it. I would still be amused by this. I would like, you know, if someone would just, like, initially when someone even gave me the premise of, like, you know, oh, you should watch this film. I don't remember who it was, but, like, you know, when I got to know about the initial premise, I was like, oh, this woman is killing, like, you know,
Taking
men at night, and I was just like, I was amused. I was like, now I want to watch it, because I was just like, I'll tell you what, from where I'm coming from. I was just like, what we did touch on, like, you know, it kind of like switches up the power dynamic of, like, you know.
And she in the movie she takes away their clothing.
Yeah.
Which is a whole different commentary.
That's oh shit. Yeah.
On
I didn't
what
even
happens
remember that.
to on what happens to women at night,
Yeah,
because we're
yeah.
usually told that, right? रात को सड़क
I
पे
have
घूमोगे
goosebumps.
कोई
That's
उठा के ले
scary.
जाएगा.
Of course.
Right, and she does
we've
that.
heard that growing up with, like, you know, like, you grew up like I have a sibling, my sister.
Grown up in Delhi. Yeah.
And I've heard that remark from my dad, from, like, you know, from my mom, both of them, like, you know, it's not safe. Like, you know, you've grown up where she would always, like, call out a double standard also. Why doesn't this exist for this? Which I'm sure you've experienced.
Exactly. Yeah. So
and it's so interesting. It kind of, like, makes me think about, like, how like, you know, usually, like, we were talking about this earlier also, where I mentioned it. I was like, you know, how you have men are like usually held as, like, the protectors. Like, you know, they kind of upheld, like, oh, men are protectors of, like, women, whereas women really don't need those protectors in spaces that men don't occupy. Like, you know, and there's, like, in fact, we have, like, there are a lot of groups that exist. Like, there's one which is just like I'm trying to remember the name, Why Loiter. Right, it's kind of just like these women who are just, like, you know, it started in, like, it's in cities like Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi. It kind of happened after that, like that Uber case in 2014, where the student was kind of, there was this case where this student was kind of, like, you know, sexually assaulted in an Uber, and it kind of really made waves. I do remember hearing about it. Right, so it's about just, like, you know, women, like, reclaiming spaces like parks, lanes, streets, and just, like, you know, kind of occupying spaces that are traditionally not occupied by women. They would go, like, they would kind of organize it through Facebook, or just, like,
and where
you know,
is this?
social this, like, there's Why Loiter, which is, like, in Bombay, in Bangalore, in Delhi, and then you have Girl at Dhabas, which originated like in Pakistan, and it's also had its own localized versions within India, like, you know, where women, like, kind of inspired each other to, like, oh, this is a great idea, and we should kind of, like, we share, like, the ideology or, like, the thought behind it, where you're trying to just, like, you know, go in droves, so that, you know, even if you're not, like, spaces like dhabas, or just like, you know, spaces which are parks and places at night where usually you're made to feel unsafe, whereas a man can go there at whatever time and not really think about that would not be in his head, like, you know, at all. So I feel like that it's kind of just, you know, quite interesting to have that. And this film kind of, so when you do hear about like, you know, this kind of like a log line or whatever, where, like, this woman is just, like, killing men at night, I personally, killing them, taking their clothes, and adding those layers, which I didn't even realize, which you just pointed out.
It was very funny to me.
Yeah,
sorry.
Funny. It's funny. It's actually funny. I can understand how, but it's also, like, it's so impactful, and it's so it kind of just, like, you know, that small thing. The film actually, like, uses humor a lot of times to kind of just, like, you know, which is why I really feel like, you know, comedy and horror, especially when combined, they can do wonders for, like, social commentary. Like, you know, you can really, like, you know,
helping you
get
swallow
points
some
across
hard pills,
without getting people to, like, swallow hard pills for sure, because it's basically that, because people don't really like realize it that oh this is happening. But in that occult space, they can kind of like other it and be like oh okay, like, you know, it's as long as it's not directly relatable through a drama or a period history kind of piece where they feel too called out. In these kind of films, I feel like that genre again, like the horror genre or like comedy or like these kind of genres kind of help passing these messages across.
No, of course, and I think that film did that in a very superb manner. Plus, I think the whole legend itself was very interesting. I don't think it was very feminist, but it was very interesting.
It kind of leaned into
I think it was unintentionally feminist.
Unintentionally feminist.
And the movie
no,
made
I feel
it
like,
feminist.
though I did, okay, so I did look it up. I did, the director did say something of this sort where he was like, I kind of wanted to be intentional about it. So, I do get the point about like, she's just killing people and she's just doing this. Is that right? But then I feel like, again, it's kind of based off like a superstition. And it's kind of
I feel
in
like
a fictional space.
I feel like the movie itself is very feminist. It has those undertones. I feel like the actual superstition or the actual urban legend, that's not
100% agreed.
that doesn't arise from that.
When you unpack that initially, also I feel like that's something that really makes you think of that again, the scorned lover or the, you know, and especially like hell
hath no fury like a woman scorned.
Exactly. So I feel like I mean, sure, like you can bring it up and like you can really channel that shit, but that can be for any person. And we've seen like, you know, that gender really doesn't come into play when it comes to like heartbreak, like, you know, or just like reacting to heartbreak. Yeah, but all in all, or go into like the conclusion of this, I think that whole movie itself is a very good intersection of gender, heartbreak, and the occult. 100%.
Right? It's very difficult to achieve.
I genuinely didn't think about the heartbreak point. I was just thinking of it.
I was like, at the end of it, she's a heartbroken woman.
But yeah, that kind of that kind of really makes sense. That brings it together in a way where, or takes it in a direction that's very interesting. To really explore.
And I think we leave listeners with that thought of what kind of intersectionality.
Hope that was like an interesting conversation. We did take a lot of detours.
हमारे लिए तो interesting थी.
Yeah, it was genuinely.
But yes.
And that's it for this episode of The Cosmosis. We'll see you guys next week. Do let us know your recommendations if you want us to discuss a specific topic. Yeah, and if you have any horror stories, I'm always up. 100%. And Abhimanyu will be a little scared, but he's also up to listen. I'm always, I love torturing myself, so please. And I torture him with those stories on a daily basis. So please send us those if you have any, and if you have any thoughts, negative or positive. We'd love to know, for sure. Yeah. Always open to feedback. We'll see you guys next episode. Thank you. Bye.